Okay, looks like I am recording. It has gone 6 o'clock on my side, so I'm going to start the lesson right here. This is going to be, I think, about the third class we've had on Sindiwe Magona's When the Village Sleeps, published in 2021. And my goal today, I think, is to look at the second part of this novel and to get us to the end. What I'm going to do over the course of this class is just highlight for you some important pages, which I think you have to really focus on when you reread the book. Okay, obviously, when you read it the first time, you don't really know what's coming, but when you go back and reread certain sections, I think these pages that I'm pointing out to you tonight will prove especially useful because what they always point to is something to do with one, place and how place operates in literature, and two, with Magona's interest in tradition and cultural heritage, which are two things, as we've seen so far, that are tied closely together, right? Culture, tradition, certain religious beliefs, ideas around community and problem solving are linked to the place, the geographical place in the world where they come from. And in order to reconnect with those beliefs, you actually have to go to the place where they come from. That seems to be Magona's argument in the book. Okay, so part 2 of the book changes perspective quite strongly, and it will look at the world from the point of view now of Mandlakazi, who's described as being a girl with a mighty strength. Remember, she's the girl who has been deliberately malformed by her mother in order to claim money off a child grant. And what happens is a kind of reversal in that we are shown the child is not born weak or sick or diminished, but it's actually born quite special. So there's an immediate subversion of what we thought was coming. If you look at page 153, you can get a sense of how Magona communicates that to us in the narrative. You'll see a poem there being spoken by the old. Top of page 153, it says, she is a girl with mighty strength, and Mandlakazi, her name is Mandlakazi. Then you read a poem from the old, the ancestors who are speaking in the novel. And so instead of the child being born weak and useless and dependent on other people, she's born instead she's born with strength and power. But the strength and power is going to be kind of magical, spiritual, divine, if I can put it that way. And then through the rest of this part, we see all the ways in which once she's come into the world, she begins to transform or change the world and make it a better place by kind of educating all the people into being independent, self-sufficient, and getting past their limitations and improving themselves instead of being dependent on the government for, welfare and sustenance, as has been the case for the other characters in the book, with the exception of Kulu. And she's actually, what's really important, I think, is that on page 156, she's taken away from the urban environment in Cape Town, from the location, and she's taken to the rural areas to be raised by Kulu on traditional medicines. And you'll see this dramatized on page 168, for example, with a discussion about Intelezi. I think what all of this is building up to is Magona's preoccupation with self-sufficiency as being the means in which people are going to heal themselves of modern day illness, affliction, and various problems. That the grant system, the SASSA grant system, social security, welfare grants, all that stuff is a plaster that's being put on a gunshot wound. It's it's well-intentioned, but it doesn't help anybody in the long term. It doesn't solve any of the major problems. And on page 172 to 3, you can read Kulu, the grandmother, giving kind of long speech or having a discussion with her children about the pitfalls of the grant system. And I think that Kulu kind of stands in for Sindiwe Magona. I think Kulu's beliefs are probably very similar to hers. I've been sharing with you various videos of interviews she's done. And I think you can get a sense there that the way Magona sees the world is also the way Kulu sees the world. And you get a sense of that maybe Kulu's ideas are also hers, right? So read those 2 pages, or pay attention to them closely, 172 to 173, because there we see her kind of argument against the grant system and why people should, instead of being dependent, they should rather be self-sufficient. And that's also what Mandlakazi seems to be brought in the world to reveal. And even somebody who's living with a disability, who's been, abused and harmed by her own mother, is able to transcend those issues, those problems, by being self-sufficient, taking care of herself, and drawing strength and power from something otherworldly, something fantastical. If you look on page 172, Kulu is talking to her mother, her children. She says that help should not be a permanent feature in anyone's life. And her daughter replies, "You think the grant is that, a permanent feature? 18 continuous years, good God. That is all the growing up years of an individual. Think of the child who grows up on this grant. To such a child, the grant must seem the most natural thing in the world. So, but don't you see, it is not. It isn't, no. No child should grow up believing they will always have to depend on outside help to live. That is inhuman." So that's kind of the moral center of the book, that people must grow up and not be dependent on others. And Mandlakazi is the embodiment of this. It helps that she's kind of imbued with these magical powers, in a sense. In the last short video I did, I think I mentioned the term magical realism. Okay, that's all a framework you can use to understand what's going on in the book, which is that we have a combination of kind of gritty, realistic depictions of South Africa and its problems, married to a more almost fairy tale-like understanding of the world, which is that magic is real and possible. And these 2 things are kind of intertwined, the magic and the realistic. And it gives us this mode in literature called magical realism. It's a kind of a literary technique which mirrors the way people have traditionally seen the world, right? Like an older, more traditional way of explaining how the world works is usually that there's some kind of not scientific explanation, but a supernatural, otherworldly explanation for things. And Mandlakazi is a kind of a re-embodiment of that idea that we can understand the world through, I will say, kind of a religious or transcendent, metaphysical way, basically spiritual way, right? And she is kind of special. So if you look at page 176 to 177, you'll see that the story kind of advances quite a lot, that Mandlakazi is described as being a seer, S-E-E-R. Seer means somebody who can see the future, who's a prophet, who can make certain predictions, not just about their own world, but about the world in general. And she says here, bit by bit, predictions became one of her more striking gifts. More than predictions, she would sleep or appear asleep sometimes, eyes wide open, but unresponsive to verbal or tactile cues. And then out of her limb form, someone would speak out, his or her voice, unlike any known to Kulu, ethereal. And the voice said things strange or only vaguely understood, things only understood in remote retrospect. And so Mandlakazi is a very curious child, because she's born with this, what is called in the book a deformity or a disability. but she doesn't really show any signs of being hampered by it because she's got all of her brains intact. She knows what's going on, but she's also got this specialness, these special abilities to her that set her out as being something new in the world. So what I think is going on is that she's kind of been sent into the world to break the cycle of suffering and poverty and misery and people being dependent on the government rather than dependent on rather than kind of living in service of their community. They live in service only of themselves. And she's sent kind of to the world in order to show people the way back. It's kind of quite a Christian idea when you think about it. That's sort of what the story of Jesus was. Jesus is sent here to show the world how to reconnect with God. So Mandlakazi is sent here by the ancestors, to reveal to people the way back, the path back to something they've been disconnected from. And in that disconnection, have suffered greatly when otherwise they shouldn't have, right? If you skip along here to page 215 to 216, you see another interesting moment where, and actually just look at page 216 specifically. This is where Kulu kind of just explains everything that I've just said. And remember, I think Kulu is probably a stand-in for Magona herself. She's talking to her children again, her adult children. She says, my children, if you could only listen, do not make yourselves needy for money because you know it is there. Live as though it weren't there. Grow your own food. Do not buy clothes unless you really need them, or the child does. You'd be amazed at how little children really need. But what we grown-ups do is foist our needs and cravings on them. We give them things they don't need to satisfy our vanity, our hunger, our blindness. The earth gives us everything we need to live, to survive. If we treat her kindly, she rewards us unstintingly. Lily sprung a headache. She could not fathom what she had done with all the Sasa money she had received over the years. That much in less than 10 years and for only one child. So, okay, the child got the deaf grant, but there are many children who got that grant, and their parents saved nothing at all. They were just like the rest of them, always waiting for the next pay date with hardly anything left in their pockets, always desperately hard up. So here we have Kulu kind of almost giving a bit of a manifesto, to say, listen, this is the way you're actually supposed to live. You've got to turn away from government dependence, from the SASA grant, because it's a waste. And actually, it just constricts you. It confines you to a certain way of living. And so it's bad for you in the long term. It might feel good in the short term, but it's bad for you in the long term. You don't need to satisfy yourself with all of these material goods, clothes, expensive food. You can grow your own food, and you don't need to spend that much money on getting yourself dressed every day, right? So this is a kind of a very old-fashioned, almost an argument to return to a different kind of a time, right? And so this is, over this whole section of the book, part 2, it kind of becomes less a story and more what I say here as being sort of a manifesto or a set of instructions for how you would set up a community-based support system for, and I say disabled and marginalized people here, but really for anybody. And a manifesto is a kind of an argument, a set of ideas, an ideology, a political framework that sets out what people should do in order to address the problems of the world. That's not usually what a novel does. Usually a novel is maybe a bit more subtle than that. It wants to show you both sides of an argument. It wants to show you the lives of people who live in very different ways and how the world can be kind of more complicated than you think. But here it's quite black and white and bluntly stated that there is a way to fix our problems. And here is what it is. And so the book, like I said, becomes less of a thing that a novel does, which is to tell a story, reveal character, and it becomes more didactic. Didactic is a word, maybe I've explained it before, which basically just means education or instructive. So I would say that the book is kind of trying to educate, instruct, help people who read it to solve their problems. I think another maybe interesting, she wrote the book in, I'm not sure when she wrote it. She published it in 21. So she wrote it probably from about 2019 to 2020, around about the time of the COVID pandemic beginning and messing with everybody's lives so profoundly as it did. And in the story, Mandlakazi actually predicts this virus coming. She predicts it because Magona knew it was happening. So she made one of the characters predict it to kind of fit in with this prophetic seer thing she's working with. And the book says, the ground will not be able to swallow all the dead. Oh, the multitudinous dead. There will be none left to bury the dead. And that was about COVID and all that, but also probably a little bit about the AIDS pandemic as well, and how terrible that's been in South Africa. It's a prophecy that harks back to the HIV epidemic we've had, in which I'm not sure exactly the number, but I think something like 2 million people have died of HIV/AIDS in South Africa. And so we weren't, even with COVID, we weren't like strangers to this sort of cataclysmic health event coming our way. Prophecy is important in the book for maybe another reason as well, a kind of traditional cultural reason, which is that one of the most famous historical events in South Africa actually has to do with a young girl being a prophet. I don't know if you know about this or how much you know about this, but in the 1850s, 1860s, there was this young teenage girl whose name was Nongqawuse, who lived in the Eastern Cape, and in the Wild Coast region of the Eastern Cape anyway. And during when she was a kid, there was also, just to be put it very simply, it was the time of British expansion through the Eastern Cape. Right, the British were gobbling up more and more parts of the Eastern Cape and pushing the amaXhosa out of the region and taking up their land. And this was a decades-long process of slowly taking over the whole Cape province and making it their colony. And while they were encroaching further and further, and the British Xhosa War was getting worse and worse, along came this girl, Nongqawuse, who made a prophecy, and she told her people, if we kill all of our cattle and burn all of our crops, then God will reward us by throwing the British into the ocean, and we'll get all of our land back. Okay? Now, about half of the people believed her, and half did not. So half of the people did indeed kill all of their cattle, destroy all of their crops. They were an agricultural people, so in doing that, they basically totally messed up their entire economy, betting that this prophecy would come true. The others who didn't believe her did not do that, but because of this kind of civil war that emerged over this, it meant that they were very, very weakened, even though not everybody fulfilled the prophecy. And it meant that they were so badly weakened and sickened by it that it made it even easier for the British to conquer them. And of course, the prophecy never came true. And that's because, and lots of people still insist on this today, here in the Eastern Cape, that if they had listened to Nongqawuse in full, and if everybody had done what she told them to do, then the British really would have been thrown out. But because only half did, the prophecy could not be fulfilled. And that's kind of what's going on in the book too. She's playing around with this idea of the spiritual experiences, the prophetess of the prophet-like nature of a young girl. And if you maybe think this is improbable, strange, it also makes me think of somebody like Greta Thunberg, who is also sort of a prophet in her own right, saying that if we don't get rid of all of our fossil fuels, the world is going to burn because of climate change. And a lot of people believe her, and a lot of people don't. And it causes a lot of trouble, this discrepancy in belief. And that's kind of what she's playing around with. So this is a repeated phenomenon in world history, whether it's African or European, the figure of the girl as prophet who comes to warn us and give us a set of instructions for how to turn everything around, otherwise we will be doomed, is an interesting one. It's almost a kind of you might call it an archetype, a repeated thing, a repeated theme in our stories. So whatever you make of that, what the book is saying is that there is such a thing as quote unquote real help. Okay. So Mandlakazi becomes the person who really offers not the band-aid on the gunshot wound, but the actual proper solution to everything. And she says, here comes help that is real. And it's worthwhile asking yourself, what is the nature of this real help at all? What does she mean by real help? And I've put a little graphic here of the word Ubuntu in here again, with it, of what it is. Roughly translated into English, it means I am, because we are. But it is an African philosophical worldview which says that the collective is more important than the individual when you really think about it, that people can only exist in the world, I am, because we are linked, because we come from other people. It requires other people to make us, to look after us, to teach us, educate us, and turn us into adults, who then in turn make other people as well, who depend on us. And the whole cycle of life is actually a collective one. That's what gives it its meaning. It's what helps us to survive in a dangerous, hostile world. And it's what keeps groups of people alive for a very, very long time. Even if the individual dies and passes away, never to be seen again, the collective continues on because they existed and contributed. And I think what the book is saying is that the sort of Western viewpoint of individualism, narcissism, selfishness is actually made worse by the fact that people live on welfare and grants. They live for themselves. Mandlakazi's mother, Bosi, does what she does to her daughter because she's being selfish, because she wants more money. And she has to learn the lesson that there are things that are more important than just yourself if you want to live a happy, meaningful, healthy life. And we need to prioritize collectivism over individualism. Right? So it's society that gives us, as human beings, our humanity. That's what makes us kind and socially productive and pro-social. Is an understanding that we are not alone, but we are connected very strongly to other people who depend on us as we depend on them. And the book is making a very direct argument that Ubuntu is the way to go, that is going to be the solution to our problems. I think if there's one thing you take from the book, it's that idea, as well as the idea that this understanding in the story emerges from place, from a rural, community-based life. The story ends, I guess, well, I'll just kind of say this, that if you want to understand the character of Mandlakazi, I think this is probably a good way to see it, is that she is an ancestral being who chooses to be born, right? So she comes from the other, she's kind of the other side. She's kind of the old, she comes from the old, and she chooses to come to Earth to bridge the gap between the present and the past. So what's going on now with how things have been before, and thereby to guide the community back to a place of harmony, peace, and productivity, right? I won't rehearse the whole plot here, but just to say that she kind of joins this, or she starts this food growing program as part of the United Nations Millennial Development Goals. You can read a lot about that on those pages, 232, 250, 254, 273. I'll just focus here briefly on the last page I mentioned. She gives it like a 7-point schema for how people should understand themselves. And this is again why I'm talking about the book as kind of a manifesto, a set of instructions and being didactic, because it's kind of doing education in a sense. So pay attention to those pages and how they think about how they kind of come off to you. Is she right? Is she wrong? Is the argument fair or wrong? So it's part of reading the book is kind of taking on board her arguments and evaluating it for yourself. Here we come to the end of the lesson, more or less, as well as the end of the book. Is her organization of helping people learn how to grow their own food. Very traditional, old-fashioned activity. It's called Fields of Hope, and that's kind of where the story ends up for Mandla, is that she becomes this figure of helping people to develop their own way in life, their own means of survival instead of being so dependent. So they become self-sufficient. So it's kind of a happy ending in a sense, even though, unfortunately, Mandlakazi dies. What happens is at the end of the novel, you can read this part over page 304 to 308, is that her organization gets caught up in the early days of the COVID pandemic and the lockdown. I'm not sure what you can remember of that time, but I'm sure you recall people, especially the poor, suddenly not being able to get work and therefore money and therefore food. And so Mandlakazi's organization sets up kind of tables of food and food kitchens, so to hand people some food at the time who don't have anything. And in so doing, attracts a large crowd of people. Things get out of control in one of the queues. The police turn up and start firing guns. It's all kind of a bit dramatic. And in that ensuing process, Mandlakazi gets accidentally shot and dies at the end of the story, which is, pretty sad. But if you look at the last lines that Mandlakazi speaks as a kind of a spirit, it is that the poor policeman who shot me, this is on 308, the poor policeman who shot me was but an instrument of my will. I had done what I had come to do. The time had come to return to the source. My fleshless colleagues were calling my name. So she's an instrument of and ancestral belief. Like the Christian story, as I mentioned earlier, she's sent here to do a certain thing to reveal to people the truth that they then have to pick up and carry themselves in order for that truth to really be a long-standing idea, I guess. So it's kind of a sad ending, but also a happy one. It's meant to be this way. I guess that's also, now that I think about it, one of the other places in the story is an immaterial place. It's the source. I turn to the source of everything. That's the final place in the book, is the kind of universal source where all life comes from, right? So the book in that sense is very spiritual, and it's making a spiritual argument that we are spiritually sick and in need of healing, and here's how we do it. And one of the solutions is place. As you can see in the picture, just grow your own food, be connected to the earth, to understand how it works and what it can do, and to respect it. Okay, that's another place idea in the story, I guess. And that is all I wanted to say about this novel. I hope you enjoyed reading it. Like I said, I think the first half is good. The second half gets a bit more, maybe too didactic, a little too forceful in its argumentation, but the author has a clear vision of what she's trying to do, and you don't have to think she's right. You don't have to accept everything about it. I think you just have to be able to hold it in your head as one of many arguments about what we need to do in South Africa in order to turn things around. One final thing, now a couple of last things. So we are done with Learning Unit 2. This will appear as a question in your POE at the end of the semester. I see you handed in your part 1. I marked it. I gave you some feedback. Also note that one of the questions has to be resubmitted in the POE, improved. Hopefully the feedback will help you to do that. So make sure you remember to hand it in that way at the end of the semester. Then second of all, there are a few ICE tasks up. Actually, all 4 ICE tasks are available for you to do. Please make sure you do them, because it's 10% of your final mark, and it's going to probably make a difference. And then last thing is that the next Learning Unit 3, is for the movie Tsotsi. I'll make a short recording about that, just introducing you to the movie. Look out for that next week. And then in the next class we'll actually look at the movie, certain things about the movie itself. So in the next couple of weeks, you have to get your hands on that movie. It used to be on Netflix, it no longer is. So you're going to have to find other means to try and get it. But make sure you've watched the movie. It's pretty good. It's pretty enjoyable. That'll be the next thing that we do. And the only way you can really understand it is to watch it beforehand. Okay, so that is us done with two learning units so far, poetry, and now this novel. Next, moving on to film, then Learning Unit 4 back onto the novel called The Promise by Damon Galgut, but that's only for a few weeks' time. Until I see you or speak to you again, hope you stay well. Remember to just stay on top of all your work, keep doing those ICE tasks, and I wish you all the best with everything else. Okay, I'll leave it there for tonight. Have a good one and speak to you again soon. Cheerio.